Luis Suarez is one of the greatest strikers of all time. His career has been filled with the highest of highs, whether it's what he did with Liverpool in 2014, almost leading them to a league title, or outscoring prime Messi and Ronaldo in 2016. He's definitely made his mark known in the footballing game. Our story starts in the summer of 2020. A then 33-year-old Luis Suarez had just came off having the worst season of his career at Barcelona up until that point. He had scored just 21 goals, which was his lowest goal return for Barcelona in the entire time that he's been there. And you have to keep in mind, he was also 33 years old and one of the highest wage earners at the club. So when Ronald Koeman had came in and became the Barcelona manager, he had pretty much told Suarez that he was not going to be in his plans, and Laporta pretty much did not fight to keep him at the club. After being made surplus to requirements, he was initially supposed to join Juventus, but that move ended up being blocked due to some alleged shenanigans about cheating his way to obtain an Italian citizenship or passport, which is a funny saga in and of itself, but that is not going to be the point of this video. So he ended up joining Atletico Madrid, who, for context, were not having a good time themselves. They had finished a distant third the previous season, scoring a measly 51 goals, which I think was only good for about 7th in the league. And this is despite the fact that they created the 4th most chances in the league that season. Now, this is a year where they were coming off losing Griezmann to Barcelona. Their highest top goal scorer was Alvaro Morata with 12. And when you look at the amount of big chances they created, it indicated that what they really needed was somebody to be able to actually finish off those chances. And you can't get much better than a Luis Suarez in any year, declining or not. He ended up scoring 2 goals in his debut as Atletico demolished Granada 6-1 in his debut game. And in fact, Atletico in general had a really, really good start to the season. They won 8 and drew 2 of their first 10 matches, which had them be the early pace setters of the season. This hot start also included Atletico getting one over on Suarez's former team as they beat Barcelona at the Wanda. However, unfortunately, Luis Suarez wasn't available for that game, so he didn't exactly get the satisfaction of beating the team that essentially threw him out. Their first sign of trouble came against their cross-city rivals, who ended up beating them pretty comfortably 2-0, courtesy of a Casemiro header, as well as an Jan Oblak own goal. Now, they were still leading the pack. However, this loss ended up bringing them a little bit back down to reality. However, they did really well to bounce back as they then went on to win the next 8 straight games, which, kind of put them in really, really good position in the league ahead of everybody else. One of the key games in that winning run they went on was match day 17, in which Luis Suarez had to score a 90-minute winner against Alaves after the Atletico surrendered a lead to them in the 84th minute. And this was even crazier when you consider the fact that Atletico were actually had a man sent off as well. And also this game allowed Luis Suarez to overtake Falcao and set the record for the best start for an Atletico player, as he contributed to 9 goals and 2 assists in his first 12 La Liga matches for his new team. Atletico were having such a good season that by match day 21, they already amassed 54 points and were a whole 11 points clear of second place Barcelona and third place Real Madrid. So that should tell you just how crazy of a start to the season that they had. What made this even crazier was that, if you recall what I said earlier in the video, Atletico's problem the previous season was that they were underperforming in terms of goal scoring relative to the amount of chances they created. And in this season, on both ends, they were outperforming their XG if you look at their underlying stats by a ridiculous margin. As you can see on the left, they scored 36 goals from an expected goals of 22.9, and then they had conceded 4 fewer less goals than what XG would have expected them to concede. So they were outperforming on both ends, and that kind of just shows you how important it is for teams to be able to win on the margins. And Luis Suarez was definitely a huge part of that on the offensive end with the amount of goals that he was scoring at the clip he was scoring them at. However, when it comes to any statistical anomaly, at some point, you're most likely going to have some type of regression back to the mean. And during the next 10 games, Atletico definitely got that regression as they went 4 wins, 4 draws, and 2 losses in their next 10. While not being exactly disastrous form, it saw their lead slip from 11 down to 6. And, they weren't exactly in the midst of throwing away a lead. However, they did have to start looking over their shoulder a little bit. Easily the most frustrating loss they had in that 10-game spell was a game against Levante in which they lost, despite the fact that they had 28 shots over 2 XG, and yet they somehow couldn't find a way to put the ball in the back of the basket. In the back of the net. And they did well to respond and bounce back after that game, but you could kind of see that the pressure was starting to mount on them just a little bit, which, to be fair, granted, given the amazing start they had, you could probably cut them a bit of slack, but still. Atleti had their second Madrid derby in the beginning of March, and it would have been another important match in deciding where the title goes. Luis Suarez did well to open the scoring in the 15th minute to have Atleti lead 1-0. And it was one of those games where it was a game of 2 halves. Atleti were definitely the better team, or at least had the better chances in the first half, at least. And then kind of as the game continued to go on, Real Madrid really grew into the game. And by about the last 20 minutes, they were just piling on the pressure. And it eventually netted in a goal for them via Karim Benzema, especially who's one of Luis Suarez's main rivals for greatest striker of his generation. And so the game ended up being a 1-1 draw for both teams, and it didn't really serve to move the needle in terms of each team's relation to each other in the title race. Then following a loss to Sevilla in early April, a game in which, I'll be honest with you, Atletico were thoroughly outplayed as well. They had essentially sleepwalked their way into an actual title race, which is kind of insane to hear when you consider just how far ahead Atletico were at a certain point in the season. Suddenly they found themselves with 9 games left, being only a point ahead of Barcelona and 3 points ahead of Real Madrid, when at a certain point in the season they were completely out of sight. And what makes this really bizarre is that, like I said, they didn't exactly have like a spell where they just lost like 7 games in a row, or they just won like 2 out of like 5 or 2 out of 10 or something like that. It was definitely more of a gradual decline that saw them somehow backdoor their way into actually having to fight out the other top two La Liga clubs for the league. At that point, people were more or less convinced that they had bottled the league and that there was no way they were going to win it. And to be fair to them, a draw with Real Betis in their next game did not do much to help those sentiments. Now, despite the fact that Atletico won their next 2 games by a combined margin of 7-0, a loss against Athletic Bilbao saw them drop out of first for the first time since match week 9. And at this point, the pressure was most certainly on. Like I said, they had been top for about like 60% of the season at this point. And despite the immense start that they had, they somehow found a way to, claw defeat from the jaws of victory. I think I've heard that phrase before. That was basically what they were doing. Now, their next game saw them take on Elche, and they were looking for their first away win in about 4 away matches, which is what put them in this predicament in the first place. They went up 1-0, courtesy of Marcus Llorente. He would then give away a handball towards the late stages of the game. Now, Atletico would get extremely, and I do mean extremely, fortunate that the Elche player ended up missing this penalty, and that saw them win the game 1-0. But again, the margins at this point were getting razor thin, and they were inches close from dropping points in the 4th away game in a row. Now, luckily for them, Barcelona were also out here doing absolute nonsense, as they went on to lose 3-2 to Granada, which put the advantage back in Atletico's hands. And Atletico had a huge test as they then went to the Camp Nou themselves, and essentially Atletico went there to play as much anti-football as possible, and they completely limited Barcelona, not giving them any big chances early, giving them any chance to really do anything. I think the biggest chance Barcelona had was a opportunity where Messi drilled past like 6 people, 5-6 people, something like that. But even then, he could only get a shot off at the edge of the box. And at this point, all Atletico needed to do was just win their next 3 games in a row, and they would officially be La Liga champions. What could possibly go wrong? Now, in the next game, they would get a fairly comfortable 2-1 win against Real Sociedad. So at this point, 2 more wins, nets them the title. All hands on deck. Don't do anything stupid from this point forward. Oh, hey, would you look at that? They did do something stupid. So in their penultimate game against Osasuna, a on-tier Budimir header was ruled to have crossed the line, which gave Osasuna the lead with about 15 minutes left to play in the game. What could only be described as 6 minutes of madness. Substitute left back Renan Lodi came on to equalize for Atletico in the 82nd minute. And then in the 88th minute, Luis Suarez ended up getting a cutback to give Atletico the lead, and they would go into the final day with the title firmly in their hands, and all they had to do was win the last game and not do this stupid ass mistake again. In the last game of the season, all they had to do was just beat Real Valladolid. I don't even know if I said that right, but I'm gonna give myself credit for that. All they had to do was do that, and they would be confirmed La Liga champions. Now, I don't even know if they really wanted to win this league, because I don't know what was going on here. But they ended up conceding first again through this counterattack that I don't even know how a team as defensively responsible as Atletico give up some nonsense like this. But yeah, Valladolid ended up going into the lead, and this put Atletico under pressure again as Real Madrid were playing Villarreal, and if they had won their game and Atletico failed to win, and then their city rivals would be confirmed as the La Liga champions. Now, as I said, Valladolid went into the lead courtesy of Oscar Plano, and this meant that Atletico needed to come back from behind once again. Now, Atletico were definitely piling on pressure in this game, and you could really tell that they could feel the tension, because choking a league title that you had an 11-point gap on at one point in the season would actually be an absurd story that would be completely infamous. It would be one of those things that would not be lived down. So, they have to keep on piling pressure. You can even see in Simeone's face, he could feel the nervousness of the situation as well. They had, I think, like 100 fans, or even more than that, waiting outside the stadium for them to celebrate the trophy if they won it. Because you have to remember, this was during, 2021, during the pandemic, or at least during the tail end. So there were no fans in the stadium for them to actually witness what their team could potentially do. Eventually, they would equalize in the second half via Angel Correa. I don't even know what he was trying to do in the situation. It's really weird. He beats 2 players, and then he kind of just toe pokes it into the net from outside the box. It's honestly one of the most bizarre goals that I've ever seen. But hey, listen, desperate times calls for desperate measures, and if the ball goes in, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. And then, so at this point, they were still needing to win the game to be confirmed champion. Now, Valladolid, oh my gosh, I cannot pronounce that name, almost put themselves back to the lead, courtesy of a header off of a Oblak save, but he just missed the bar, and to what could have potentially been an open goal. And Atletico, again, were counting their lucky stars that didn't go in. And then finally, in the 67th minute, courtesy of a Valladolid player doing a horrendous back pass, Luis Suarez pounces on it, and he finishes it, giving a guy of this much quality that kind of opportunity. He's able to put the ball in the back of the net, and he ultimately scores the goal that wins the championship for Atletico Madrid. Now, if I were to make a review of Luis Suarez's first season at Atletico, now before we even say anything about that, I definitely think I would be amiss if I don't mention the interesting, somewhat weird parallel between him and David Villa, right? Both of them, leaving Barcelona probably a year or two too early, going to Atletico Madrid, helping them win a title in their first season there at an older age. So it's pretty funny. But anyway, back to Luis Suarez. If I were to review his time there, I would say Luis Suarez's first season there was completely emblematic of Atletico's season as a whole. He starts the season on fire. Like I said, you're right, he scored 9 goals, 2 assists in his first 11 matches. He was just on fire, and it looked like he was going to do something crazy in La Liga. Now, Atletico weren't too great in the Champions League. Neither was Luis Suarez. When Atletico were going through that hard spell that almost saw them bottle the title, Luis Suarez only scored 3 goals in about 13 matches in that time span. But he clutched up when he needed to, scoring the winning goal in the last 2 games that they needed to actually win the title. And in fact, throughout the season, right, Suarez scored 7 goals game-winning goals for Atletico. So that means his goals won them at least 21 points, which, given that they only won the league by about 2 points, was wholly unnecessary and completely clutch by him. Now, I think what obviously was probably fueling him was, the motivation from being spurned by Barcelona in the manner that he was, especially when you consider just the amount of things that he had done for, Barcelona throughout his time there. It was something that even Messi had spoke on. It was something that annoyed him because he thought that Suarez was also just, discarded a bit too early by Barcelona as well. And I think, kind of as the season went on, you could kind of see that, maybe his age is starting to catch up with him because, again, he was 33, turning 34 at this point throughout the season. But like I said, he clutched up what he needed to. He still got 21 goals in the league this season, which was a big step up from the freaking 12 that Alvaro Morata was able to give them the year prior. And ultimately, I mean, winning a league title with Atletico Madrid at the age of 34, it's still crazy, right? Regardless of, the context that they basically almost bottled what should have been an easy league title when you consider just how bad Barcelona and Real Madrid were that season as well. But again, the most important thing is that ultimately they end up winning it. And, in 50 years' time, the trophy isn't going to say, they won, but, like low-key, they shouldn't have, and the XG was high and all that crap. All the trophy is going to say is that 2021, La Liga champion, Atletico Madrid. Anyway, that is going to end it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you guys liked it. And most importantly of all, remember to have a good day.